This is Abraham. That beard is magnificent. Sure, he probably didn't wear stunner shades like that, but if he could have, he would have, right? Abraham lived a long time ago in ancient Mesopotamia, and he lived a big life, so big that sometimes he's called the father of our faith. But why? Who is this man? And as we look at his life, what can we learn about faith, about God, about our journey? What lessons can we learn from this father of the faith?
So my second year teaching high school, I had 11th to 12th graders, mostly those classes, and that's when I met Nina. Nina was one of my students. She was in 11th grade, and I remember I walked in one morning. It was early in the school year, probably 4th or 5th week. And I'm there, I've got all my stuff, I got my books, I got my papers, I put it down on my desk, and then one of my colleagues is like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, hey, and then we go out in the hallway, we talk, students are filing in, Nina comes in with her friends, they're there in the classroom, and I go back over to my desk where I placed all my stuff, including something I had planned to eat for breakfast. It was a Nature Valley granola bar in the green packaging. And I went over to my desk to go to eat it, and it wasn't there, and I'm like, oh no, it's fallen. And I don't like it when they fall and they crack, because I like to remove them from the package as one with the honey Christmas and then just like wood chipper it. You know, it's just fun. It's what I wanted, I was hoping for. So I was like, oh no, it fell. And I looked on the ground, it was not there. And I looked over, and there was Nina eating a Nature Valley granola bar, which she did not have before. And I look around again, and I realize, oh, no, you didn't. So I go over to Nina and her friends. And I'm like, hey, Nina, can I talk to Nina for a sec? They're like, sure, and they leave. I'm like, Nina, did you take my Nature Valley granola bar? And she's a teenager. She's like, no. She said as she ate my Nature Valley granola bar. And I'm like, Nina, sweetie, you've made a terrible mistake. Do I look like someone who does not keep track of his food? I keep such good track of my food. I'm part squirrel, girl. And so she laughs. And I came to find out that Nina did indeed take my Nature Valley granola bar, but she had a reason for it. See, Nina, like many of my students, had a pretty tough home life. Her dad had abandoned the family when Nina was just 3, when her little sister came along and just left. And as is always the case, when men leave their responsibilities, it hurt women and children. It hurt her mom, hurt her. So her mom's struggling to make ends meet in the very expensive Silicon Valley. They got a 1-bedroom apartment with her and her sister and her mom, and they're living there. And her mom, in her brokenness and needs, just met a guy, and this guy promised a lot of stuff. And so she went away with him to Vegas for 5 days with pretty much no notice for Nina and her sister. So after about 3 days, the food's kind of running out in the house, in the fridge, in the cupboards. Nina doesn't know what to do. So by day 4, she's going to the store and she's shoplifting to get food for her and her sister because her mom didn't leave any money, didn't leave a credit card. Nina doesn't know what to do. It's now day 5. She comes to school. She's hungry. There's nothing in the house, and she sees the granola bar, so she takes it. I learned something important from Nina that day. It's something I think is really true, and that's this: that toxic environments can warp us. Toxic environments can warp us, and some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're in a toxic environment long enough, it can begin to change the way that you think about yourself, the way you think about the world, about reality, about even who you are. It can change the way you behave and act and move in this world. Toxic environments can warp us. We all know people who are involved in terrible relationships, and they get out of them, and then they get to health, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a second, if I tell you the truth, you'll tell me the truth. You won't punish me for that, and then I'll tell you more truth, and you'll tell me more truth, and all of a sudden we'll develop this thing called trust. Imagine if you've never had that. Toxic environments warp us. And so I realized really quickly, along with myself and some other teachers, that we were going to have to do some real work with Nina. Because she had, in that toxic environment, learned something very destructive, and that's that adults can't be depended on. Adults will abandon you. Adults will not take care of you. Even those who are the most morally and legally obligated to take care of you will not. And so you have got to get your own. You got to grab it and take what you need, because no one's going to protect you. No one's going to look out for you. Toxic environments can warp us. And the longer we're in that, the more that toxicity can seep into our very bones and change us in ways that are just not destructive, not helpful, and they're destructive. So I realized I had some work to do, so I said, Nina, tomorrow when you come to my classroom, you see that filing cabinet, the bottom shelf is going to be taken out. I'm going to empty everything out, and in that filing cabinet is going to be a giant Costco-sized box of Nature Valley granola bars. It's for you, and you can come in at any time, between class, before school, after school, not during class, but any other time, and you can grab a Nature Valley granola bar. You can have one. They're yours. So the next day she comes to class, and guess what's the first thing that Nina does? She checks to see if I was telling the truth. She opens up the filing cabinet, and there's the Costco-sized box of Nature Valley granola bars. And then I said to her, Nina, tomorrow when you come to school, I'm going to give you a card. It's going to be from the school bank. It's going to allow you to get breakfast or lunch from the school cafeteria. And some teachers and I are going to get together, and we're going to load that card with enough money for you and your sister to have breakfast and lunch every single day till now, to the end of the year. Tomorrow I'm going to give you that card. So I do. She comes in the next day. I give her the card. I say, and then, with all this other stuff going on, I know that Nina, legally, we as teachers are talking, administrators are talking. I know that Nina needs to talk to somebody, a professional. So I'm like, Nina, it would be great if you talked to our school psychologist. She's awesome, Miss Rachel. She's phenomenal. She knows you. She's really great. She's like, nope, not talking to any adults. They'll just call CPS or something. I'll be taken out. I'll be put in foster care. My life's better than that right now. I'm not doing that. She just didn't trust. So I'm like, okay. How about this? So I said, I'm going to put a Post-it on your desk every Monday, every Wednesday, every Friday. And you're just going to put a little number, write a number on that Post-it. It represents how well you're doing. If it's an 8, 9, 10, I know you're doing okay. If it's a 5, 6, it's okay. But if that number creeps below a 5, a 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that, I know that you're having a tough go of it, and you have full permission to miss my class and just go take some time and just go talk to Miss Rachel. Just if you don't want to, just sit outside our office. Just take time. There's no penalties. I know that there's something going on more important than school. After a couple of weeks of this, Nina actually begins to realize that maybe there are some adults that will listen, who care, and so she goes. The point is this, that Nina had to heal. And sometimes to heal from those toxic environments, we need to unlearn some things. And that can take a long time. The more toxic, the more time we've been in it, the more time it takes for us to unlearn some habits, behaviors, the things that we thought were true. And Nina had to unlearn some things. But you can't be told those things. You can't unlearn these things by being told. You have to be shown. Because if I had said, hey, Nina, your presuppositions about adults aren't accurate, and there are adults that do care, she would have been like, shut up. Because she needed to see it in real life. So every morning when I came into class, when she got a granola bar, I wasn't giving Nina granola bars, and I wasn't giving her a card for free lunch. I was giving Nina the chance to trust adults again. Much bigger than granola bars. Because when you're in that toxic environment, you have to unlearn some things. And that doesn't just happen overnight. Sometimes you need to be shown, not told. I say all this because it's helpful to keep this story about Nina in the front of our minds as we enter into this text this morning. This Bible story from Genesis 22, which is one of the most important stories in the entire Bible, one of the seminal works, one of the seminal stories, and also the most important moment in the life of Abraham, who we've been studying for the last 5 weeks. This moment, super huge. It's in Genesis 22, and it's the moment where God tells Abraham to go to a mountain and kill his son Isaac. The story is so confusing and so unsettling. It's actually used by those who are hostile to Christianity to delegitimize this God. They say, see, this is the kind of God you Christians worship. The kind of God who tells a man to kill his kid. Not only is God immoral, he's a moral monster. And anyone who follows him is also a moral monster. But this is not just a caricature of the scripture. It's not just a tragic misreading. We have to do the hard work to get into the story because otherwise it will do violence to our faith and to our trust in God. But if we do the hard work, if we get into this, we will see that this story in Genesis 22 is not something to avoid or not something to pretend is not there, but something for us to run headlong into because it shows something incredibly beautiful about God. So let's read it. Genesis 22. I'm going to read the whole chapter, and then we're going to talk about it. Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. And then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. And as the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went off together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But an angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. And then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. A couple thoughts about the story as we dig into it. We have to do the hard work of examining the story. Again, I'd like to show you, this is Genesis 22. This is very, very, very early in the story of God's dealings with man. This is very early. This is very in the beginnings of the story. This is the rest of the Bible. So God is trying to do something and show something. And you have to remember who this is being written to. Moses is writing this to the Hebrew people. He's trying to say something. Now, some thoughts about this. This story is interesting in a number of ways for 2 reasons that stand out to me. First, it's shocking to me how little Abraham features in this story. This is different than the other narratives in Genesis. I mean, Abraham's there, but he hardly says anything. All we have is a couple words. In fact, we got 45 words Abraham says and a couple of actions. We have no insight into a psychological state. There's no thought processes that are revealed about what Abraham's going through. Abraham's got 45 words, and God, or a messenger of God, says 140 words. This is a hint to us because Abraham is not the main character in this story. And if we focus on Abraham as being the main character in the story, we'll miss it. Because the main character in the story is not Abraham, it is God. What is God trying to do? And again, if you're in a toxic relationship, we get flawed by this. And that's exactly what Moses and the Hebrews are dealing with. They have been in a toxic environment for 400 years as slaves. They've been oppressed by the largest empire on earth. They've been slaves. They don't know how to be free. They don't know anything about what it means to be a people group. They've never ruled themselves. They've always been ruled over. They have no idea how to live. And they have no idea about this God that rescued them, although there's some hints in the Exodus and the plagues and all that they don't really know what's going on. So Moses is trying to show them, here's how to live, and more importantly, here's who this God is. He's trying to show them this is who God is. And Abraham is in the same boat. The other amazing thing about this story is that we get no insight into what Abraham is thinking. Imagine God tells you to kill your kid. If you're writing a story about it, you're probably going to include some details about how distraught you were, or how emotionally overwhelming this was, or what confusion this was when God had promised a kid and then said to kill. I mean, this is where we would live. But every commentator notices this. There's no surprise in Abraham because there was nothing to be surprised about. Sacrifice in the ancient world, animal sacrifice was everywhere, and human sacrifice was present. This was not a surprise. This was not a shock, and that's the point. In the ancient world, sacrifice of animals was everywhere. And sacrifice of humans was present. We know this from archaeology and from sociology. In the ancient idea, in the ancient Mesopotamian world, and this is where Abraham would have grown up. He was in Ur, which was a part of the Chaldean Empire. They had lunar worship there. Mesopotamian cultures were all pagan and animistic. And it's interesting, if you look at ancient Mesopotamia, you'll see remarkable similarities between other ancient cultures too. You'll see similarities between the Olmecs and the Aztecs in South America, between African tribal traditions. You'll see it in Germanic tribes, all the way up through Britain. You'll see it in mainland Mongolia and mainland China. You see it in Oceania, in the Polynesian tribes. It's the same remarkably homogeneous idea and theology about God, and that's this, that the gods are angry. And that the gods are angry, and we have to do something to appease them. We have to give them something to make them less mad at us. And we're not sure it's going to work. There's uncertainty about whether or not the sacrifice that we're making to these angry gods is even going to work. This is remarkably homogeneous in the ancient world. This was the standard theology. In fact, this goes on today. I have a friend who's a Bible translator and works in Indonesia. A few years back, she came back to the United States from Indonesia after spending so many years there. And she said that every single morning, the people in the village would sacrifice a chicken. Someone in the village would sacrifice a chicken to keep the dark spirits away, to maybe, just maybe, protect somebody in that village from bad things happening every single morning. It's 2015. That's when she told me. It was also interesting. She said, I have to go back to Indonesia. I said, why? And she goes, I cannot take America. There is so much idolatry here. Sit on that for a bit. Okay. Now, before we blame them and say, oh, you're just stupid, simple, superstitious people, we have to be more generous than that. We have to get out of our chronological snobbery, because the vast majority of humans who have ever lived do not live in the way that we live. And so this culture is this is thousands and thousands of years ago. And this culture is so distant from us. Here's a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, every single person who lived in the ancient world was at the mercy of weather and season cycles that they could not control. Everyone was agrarian. There's no such thing as a Safeway. There was no Costco if something went wrong. In California now, today, we have a 2-year drought, and it's a minor inconvenience, and our lawns die. A couple thousand years ago, there's a 2-year drought. Half of us are dead, including almost all the children. We just don't even understand the distance from nature. We don't understand what that would have been like. They were completely at the mercy of the cycles of the seasons, and there was nothing they could do to control them. So in the midst of that, what's the primary emotion that creeps up? Fear. And when you're afraid of something you can't control, what do? You're desperate. You do whatever you can. Maybe the gods are angry. Maybe if we give them this, they'll stop. Maybe they'll send the rain if we do this. I don't know, just try it. There's no guarantee, but you got to try. It reminds me a little bit of those Major League Baseball players who have those really elaborate at-bat, they tap their belt 4 times and their cleats 3 times each, and then they, it's like, is that going to help you get a hit? I don't know. It worked against the Mariners. They just do it, right? This weird superstition, but it's hope against hope in an area of life where they had no control. The gods are angry. They must be angry because this world is hostile. We have to do something to appease them, and we're not even sure that this will work. Now, in the middle of the story, God says to Abraham, hey, sacrifice your kid. And Abraham's like, okay. And there's not any pushback because this was common. Oh, that's what every God demanded. You must be like every other God, Abraham is thinking. And this is what Moses is telling the Hebrew people. They would have said, oh, this is what every other God's like. I see. But then in the middle of the story, what happens? God says, time out, stops the play and says, stop. And then he says, Abraham, don't kill your boy. And then he provides a ram stuck in a thicket. Rams don't get caught in thickets. They just don't. I don't own rams, but that's what biologists tell us. They don't get caught in thickets. It's like seeing an elephant upside down. Oh! Just doesn't happen. So what's the point here? God is trying to say something. This story is not about Abraham. It's about God. And God is trying to say something to Abraham, to Moses, to the Hebrew people, and to us. He's saying the same thing. I am not like every other God. I am not. I am different than every other conception that has ever existed on the planet. I am different. I am not angry. God is not angry. I do not take. I do not steal. I don't need your stuff. And I'm not angry. And I'm the one who gives. I'll give. I'll provide. And I'll do it out of love. Love. Weird, right? Abraham and God have this relationship. Yahweh likes Abraham. He enjoys being with him. You see no hint of this in any ancient mythology, ever. The gods in ancient mythology are indifferent at best. That's the best you could hope for. It's like a junior high bully. Just don't let him look. Don't let him. Just stay low. Keep your trapper keeper close to your chest and just walk to Spanish class. That's the best you could hope for in the ancient world. Thanks for that trapper keeper reference, yeah. 7 of you got that. That's the best you could hope for. And in this story, God is showing Abraham, he's showing Moses, he's showing the Hebrew people, and he's showing us, I am not that kind of God. I'm not. I'm different than every other God. I'm not angry. I don't take, I don't steal from humans. I don't steal from people. And I give because I love. Now, this is shocking. In fact, this story is the first time 2 important words appear in the Bible, words that are going to kind of frame the rest of the Bible. Those words are worship. This is the first time the word worship appears in the Bible, and the first time the word love appears in the Bible. Because God is reframing both. He's redefining what love is and what worship is. Up until this point, worship was, hey, let's kill something and hope the gods are happy. And God says, no. I'm the God who provides. I give. When you come to me with worship, I give, and I give first. God is turning the ideas of the gods upside down. This is what now there's this weird passage in here I want to point out because I got stuck on this for a long time. It's a really hard passage. It took like 3 weeks just for me to get emotionally unknotted from this. God says, don't do anything to your son. And now I know that you fear God. Actually, a messenger, angel of the Lord says, now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. There's a word in here that's a little strange. It's the word fear. And if we're not careful, we have to do a lot of work here now linguistically and have the help of scholars to unpack this word fear. When I hear the word fear or fear God, I think of an alcoholic dad taking off his belt, just ready to hit somebody, and you better get out of his way. That's the fear of the Lord. That's kind of the image I had. This is just not accurate. The Hebrews don't have very many words. The Hebrew language has far less words than almost any other language, and their words have nuance and meaning and poetry. Like the same word for dirt is the word for red, because the dirt in the ancient world was red. And it's also the word for man, Adam, because Adam was made from dirt, right? Do you see there's some nuance here? The same word for wind is the word for spirit, which is the same word for breath, right? So there's all this nuance in poetry in the Hebrew language. And the word fear has the same connotation. I need to unpack this a little bit. Old Testament scholar Tremper Longman, who's a professor at Westmont College down south, wrote a Bible commentary called The Story of God, in which he wrote this. He said, the phrase fear of God and the related term fear of the Lord does not describe fear as you or I might think, but rather describes a proper relationship with God. One who fears God knows his proper place in the cosmos. And then R.W.L. Moberly, who also wrote a commentary called The Theology of the Book of Genesis, wrote, fear is the Old Testament's prime term for a right human response to God. When used in relation to God, it does not indicate fright or even usually awe, but rather right attitude and right obedience. So let me try to explain what this might look like. So my buddy Josh Fox, who's a worship pastor here at Westgate, he told me this story a couple years ago. He brought his 3-year-old son, London, to the San Francisco Zoo. Beautiful zoo. Oakland Zoo, also beautiful. They're equally beautiful. But San Francisco Zoo has this really cool thing. They have gorillas. They have this giant gorilla enclosure. And at the top, there's an observation deck, and you can see them. And there's like this giant silverback, and there's like a whole bunch of females, because I guess that's how he rolls. He's a playa. And he's sitting there, and so they have this huge, like 700-pound silverback. It's impressive. And so Josh's son London is like, I want to go see. And so they go there, and they also have this observation deck on the bottom that's on the ground. It's this giant plexiglass piece of glass. And so the gorilla, the male silverback, is sitting right on the edge of the glass, like right there. And London runs up, and he's trying to find him. Where is he? And he doesn't see it. He's like right there. And he gets over to the gorilla, and I guess startles him because he's like going like this. And the gorilla like turns to him and goes, "Hur!" and just hits the glass, right? And London had the Hebrew word fear right then. He had a proper response. He goes, "Big monkey, big monkey, big monkey." Which is really a reflection on Josh's scholarship, because really it's not a monkey, it's an ape, because it doesn't have a tail, but whatever, London, you're 3. You could say, in a very Hebrew sense, that London had the proper response and the proper relationship to that gorilla. This thing can dismember me, and my response is to get away and not make it mad, right? So there's a proper relationship there. That's the Hebrew word fear. Proper response, proper relationship. But what happened next was also right in the category of the Hebrew word fear. Little London runs to his dad, grabs his dad's leg, grabs his dad's hand, and says, "Help, Daddy." And that's also the Hebrew word fear, because that's a proper response. When you're scared, run to Dad. And it's a proper relationship, an understanding, Dad is here. Dad will not take me into danger. He will protect me, and I am safe with Dad. That's also the Hebrew word fear. But you and I would never use the word fear in that instance, would we? But that's what the Hebrews are talking about. And that's what God is after in this story. And that's what Moses is trying to show the Hebrew people, who have grown up in 400 years of toxic environment. They've been warped in their theology. God is not angry. He wants you to have a right response and a right relationship, one of love, and God is the one who gives, not takes. He's the one who provides, not demands. And he redefines worship, and he redefines love. That's what God is after here in this. Now, the whole point, I think, in this is that Abraham is fundamentally changed by this. Once he sees who God is, he begins behaving in right relationship and a right response. Imagine if after everything that all those teachers did for Nina, she continued to steal my Nature Valley granola bar. Imagine every morning she just snuck over and just took it off my desk, forgetting that there was a filing cabinet full, forgetting that there was a card that we had given her that would allow her to have food at any point. Would you say that she had been changed by that information? No, we would say, Nina, you didn't get it. Like, let's try to help you unlearn. You're still not out of your toxicity, right? So the point of this is once God shows us and helps us unlearn things and shows us these things, we have got to change. We cannot go on behaving as though and believing as though the way that we previously believed is still the right way. This must change us. Nina can no longer continue to steal granola bars. It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. And yet, we as people are shown this God, and so often we don't change, do we? There was a guy who was a pastor of a large church in Oklahoma who kind of discovered this. He discovered his name was Craig Rochelle. He was a pastor of a large church, and he basically discovered something really troubling. He said he's in the middle of the Bible Belt, and he's sitting there, and he's like, I have all these people who believe that God exists, and yet when push comes to shove, they actually do not behave or live as though God exists. They don't consult him for decisions. They don't have. So he termed this phrase Christian atheist, which is kind of an oxymoron, but that's his point, right? He's saying it's somebody who says, I say that you believe that God exists, but you live as though he doesn't. And he identified these 6 things, these characteristics, these attributes. And then he discovered something else even more disturbing. He realized it wasn't just people in the congregation, it was also himself. Had this tendency to say, I believe in God, but behave and act and live as though God does not. So I'm going to go through these. So one of them is probably going to be convicting to you. As I read through this list, there's one that just like, bam, like hit me. But there's probably, and maybe it's more than one. If it's all 6, you're in trouble. The point is, you're not in trouble. You just got a lot of work to do. That's all right. I'm just going to go through these. Probably 1 or 2 will hit you. When you believe in God but don't really know him, there's some of you in this room or listening, and your spiritual life is not very vibrant, and you haven't grown a lot lately. It's because it's such a low priority for you, your spiritual life. You spend no time trying to figure out who God is. You're not reading classics, listening to other Christians, talking about God, getting into the Word of God that reveals him for who he is. It's just not a priority. It'd be good to re-examine your priorities and to heat that one up. Get to know God. Spend the time. It's worth it. You believe in God but don't think he's fair. There are some in this room who feel as though God has given you a raw deal. Perhaps it's because you've had expectations and you feel like God owes you some things. Maybe you wouldn't put it that way, but if you get underneath it, that's what's going on here. Maybe you feel like God exists to make your life what you want. God doesn't promise that. It's hard to say, and I know you don't want to hear it, but that's not what God promises. There's some for whom suffering feels like, oh, that must mean that God has forgotten me. But you forget that Jesus is actually called by the prophet Isaiah the suffering servant. And he goes to a cross and suffers. If God suffers and we're supposed to be like Jesus, then doesn't that mean that we'll suffer? It might be good to do some hard work there. You believe in God but aren't sure he loves you. This was mine for a long time. I took all my dysfunction with my own dad and put it right on God, which is just not fair. I had this image that Jesus invited me home after school to come for a play date, and we were going home after school. And we go to his house, and it's a big, big house with lots and lots of rooms, a big yard. We can play football. And Jesus invites me in. There's a gorgeous foyer, like the huge chandelier, because it's God's house. And I hear God the Father in the other room say, hey, Jesus, can I talk to you? And so Jesus goes into the room, and I can hear them talking. And God the Father says to Jesus, what is he doing here? And Jesus is like, but Dad, he's my friend. He's really cool, and Jesus, he's going to make a mess. And if anything breaks, I'm telling you, Jesus, it's on you. You clean it up. Okay, Dad, all right. And that was my view of God. Completely unbiblical, completely not fair, completely my own issues. That's how I believed. And I had to do a lot. It took years to undo that bad theology. One of the things that broke me was that verse, the most famous verse probably in all the Bible. For God so loved the world. Whose idea was this salvation project? Who wanted his kids home? Who not only died for me, but loves me and likes me? It's God the Father. They're united. There's no difference in the Trinity and their love for me. You believe in God, but trust more in money. That's a big one in this valley. It's hard. It's difficult. Money can buy lots of stuff and solve lots of problems, except for the most important ones. And there's some problems that you can't solve with money. How's your generosity? Does money have a hold on you? When you believe in God but pursue happiness at any cost, when you do whatever it takes to be happy and you don't even consider or think about what God might have to say about that thing, whether it's even good or healthy, then God isn't your God. What you want is your God. And just because you want something doesn't mean that God's going to endorse it. And anyone who's walked with God long enough knows that sometimes what we want will lead to death. It's not good for us. And we have to subjugate our wills. Very hard, very difficult. When you believe in God but don't want to go overboard with this whole Jesus thing, that's moderation in all things, right? But anyone who's ever loved anyone knows that this is just a lie. You don't go on a date and be like, oh, hold on. We are having way too much fun. We're bonding way too much. Let's stop moderation in all things. You don't play with your kids. You're like, whoa. Too much fun, kids. Let's stop the parent-child bond right here. Let's not go crazy. That's just not the way love works. That's absurd. So maybe one of those 6 hits you. The point is we have to be changed by this. In the book of Hebrews, there's this list of the Hall of Fame of heroes, and Abraham gets 11 verses. Moses gets 6, everyone else gets 1. I mean, this man is a hero of the faith. Why? Because everything in his life was changed and was through the lens of his relationship with Yahweh. You say, well, that's nice, Dave, but that's a couple thousand-year-old story. How do I know it's not even just a myth, another myth made up by ancient peoples? I'll tell you why. It's because this story, did you notice? Did you see that this story just points to another moment? Your son, your only son, said 3 times. Because 2,000 years later, there would be another boy who would walk up a hill, and he would have wood on his back too. And he would say to his papa, where are we going? But unlike Isaac, there was no lamb provided because he was the lamb, and Jesus was torn apart. He was sacrificed. You want to know what God's like? This whole story is pointing toward Jesus. You want to know what God's like? He's not angry. We don't have to appease him. He doesn't take, he gives, and he gives until he bleeds. And that's what communion is about. A chance to remember that this is what God is really like. Jesus is the exact representation of God, and he died and shed his blood for us. This is what God is like. He gives and gives and gives. And why? Because he loves us and wants us to be in a right relationship with him. And we can because of this. So as we take communion together as a group, let the story just sink deep into your heart. And may you be changed by the reality that God is not angry. He doesn't take, and he doesn't need to be appeased. He loves, and he gives. And he wants us to be in a right relationship with him. And the proper response is to love him back. Let's pray, shall we? God, thanks for this story. It's so difficult, but it's also beautiful. You're so patient as you've revealed yourself over the ages, who you really are, and we're in awe of what you're really like. As we pause for communion, we remember what Jesus did and what it shows us about what you're really like. We're so glad you're not angry, although you have every reason to be. We're so glad you're not indifferent, although we would not blame you if you were. But your mercy and your grace just do not stop, and your love never ends, as proven by the cross. So thank you for that. Thanks for redefining worship and love. And may we respond in true worship with hearts full of love. It's in your name we pray. Amen.